Carson, Leno, Fallon. Now, it's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are on an away game today up in the Napa Valley of Saint Helena with the famed Chris Phelps of Ad Vinum Winery, as well as Inglenook and other places. Introductions in just a moment. We're here to have a great conversation with the famed Chris Phelps, who has made his way around the world making wine, and this is what we're going to talk about now. I screwed up the first 20 minutes of this interview because I didn't push the record button, but we're gonna recap it.
But we've been drinking
again.
good wine, so
we've had good wines.
We're ready to go.
And welcome to the show. We were talking about the beginning of this trek of yours into the wine world, and it's it comes different flavors from everybody else, but and a lot of it we were going to get on that subject anyway eventually about coming to Napa Valley and creating a lifestyle for yourself, but you were kind of born into this idea of wine, just the idea of wine.
Yeah, in a simplified way, because my parents, growing up in the East Bay of San Francisco, Livermore Valley, home to Concannon and Wente, which have been there for many decades, my parents drank the local wines, and in fact, in the 60s, they started making their own wine at home. Zinfandel and Cabernet, they'd get the grapes from Napa Valley or somewhere else. And so I grew up with parents who, a lot of their friends drank hard liquor, gin or whiskey, but they drank wine, and they drink it. It was as part of the meal. They were both, from European backgrounds in their family.
Yes.
Second or third generation, but they were instilled in them, I think, with some genetic, idea that wine, and I think this is true for a lot of America,
that's true, though.
Right?
I think genetics is a good way to put that.
Yeah, and so we hear wine is so new in the States.
Yes,
I mean, we like to think
considerably.
In Napa, I do some work for Inglenook, and it started in 1879. I mean, that seems ancient to us, but it's not.
No,
by Bordeaux, by European standards. So it's still a new thing here. So sometimes here it's an affectation, and it's largely based on the lifestyle.
Well, it's interesting you said, we didn't discuss this earlier, but yes, the monks of Burgundy, 1200, 1100, I think the Romans went through Bordeaux at around 1200 and planted grapes. And there's something about the grape. We didn't get this earlier, but I want to talk about that too. There's something about the grape, and maybe we'll get to it later, that is different than any other fruit or beverage that it makes, that draws us to the soil, that draws us to where it's from, that draws us to this genetics that we're talking about, that it's inherent in our lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about how the Europeans, that's just the way it is. I mean, in America, it's new.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about our industry, really? In Napa Valley, 1976, right?
Well, do you even call it an industry? Because here, when people say, what do? You say, I'm in the wine business.
Yeah.
No one would ever say that in French.
The wine business.
In Bordeaux, you're in wine.
C'est l'entreprise de vin, no?
Je suis dans le vin. You just say, I'm in wine.
Right.
And here, and frankly, it's sometimes, in my experience, it's mostly in Bordeaux, okay? But sometimes it's actually a burden. It's not always just a lifestyle choice. It's what your family does. And it's a job.
Right.
But for the most part, in Bordeaux, it's very integrated in just that's who they are. They are people in wine, not in the wine business.
It's interesting because that triggers so many thoughts. Like the other day, I got this Facebook ad for an advent calendar of wine, and they hit every button that every American consumer wants to hear about the gift and the repetitive, the subscription box, blah, blah. And then it went on to say that there was 0 carbs and low sugar. And I'm like, that isn't why we drink wine.
Yeah.
It's not because of low carb. I don't care how many carbs it has.
No.
I drink it because it makes me feel something.
Well, it gives pleasure. I think
Yes.
a wine that is well made, well presented, and honest gives pleasure.
Honest. So you left, you decided, you had your friend Mike, who was very interesting. And the reason I know this, listeners, is because we already had this conversation, but it's interesting to me that there was a wine geek in the 70s who encouraged you to go check this out.
Yeah, 1976, I met him in a little podunk town in Idaho, and he, I didn't know 2 things about wine. I mean, my parents, made wine at home, but that didn't mean I knew about it. And I told him, hey, I'm going to UC Davis. I'm pre-med, but they have a viticulture enology program you need to get into. So he immediately, at the end of that summer, got into Davis and ended up owning his own winery. But within about 6 months to a year, he had me convinced I should do winemaking.
Was that the preeminent school at the time at UC Davis?
Yeah. I mean, Fresno was already there.
Fresno was running.
Fresno's always been a little more practical than Davis. And that may be changing, I hope.
That's interesting. My father was a pharmacist, came here from Egypt, and he went to USC and got his master's there. And it was the practical school of pharmacy, where Berkeley was the theoretical, philosophical school of pharmacy.
Right.
So I suppose that the difference would exist in the wine world as well.
Yeah. And there are people in wine who are more practical. I almost said wine business.
Yes.
But who are more practical than others. But it's an interesting mix of people. I'm sure, you've talked to hundreds or thousands of people, so you know how different we are.
Yes.
You mentioned pharmacies in Bordeaux, and this is still a little bit true. Like when I worked in the small town of Fussignan, fast forward to 1982 when I was interning in near Saint-Emilion, the guy who did the wine analysis in the area was the pharmacist.
Really?
Yeah. He just did in the back. In one way, you turn one way, it's to fill prescriptions. The other way, you're doing wine analysis.
Well, I have to tell this story. I don't think I've ever told the story to anybody, but my dad, in 1974, he dragged me up here to get wine antiques, which I still have lugged around all my offices. I put out the presses and the carts and everything. I mean, I'm done doing it. And but he dragged me up in a station wagon. We loaded this thing up with junk, and he would tell me the stories. And when he went to Burgundy, he went to Beaune, and he went to the Rotary Club because he was a huge Rotarian at the time. And because that button says pharmacist on it, right, because you have to put your classification, they sat him with the pharmacist. And he's like, no, I want to sit with the wine guys, but he couldn't. And he speaks French as well, so he tried to get moved. But they said, you're going to sit with the pharmacist. Yeah, but I bet the
pharmacy guys knew a lot about wine.
And they do a lot about wine. That's exactly what happened.
And actually, the School of Enology in Bordeaux grew out of the School of Pharmacy, I believe.
I wouldn't know, because, his specialty is particularly from the old country, so to speak, from Cairo. Plant medicine was very important. That was his specialty, plant-based medicine. And that makes a ton of sense, right?
Absolutely.
So how did you get to Bordeaux in the first place that you were there?
Well, I was finishing up at UC Davis, and after a 6-month internship at Louis Martini, went back for a semester, and I was sitting with my advisor at Davis, and he said, why don't you go to Bordeaux for a year, And before I got married, my wife-to-be was going to be going to school in San Francisco, and she said it was okay. So I went off to University of Bordeaux, and school's free there if you can figure out how to.
I don't understand that, but that's great.
Yeah, I think our country's a long way from that.
Yeah.
But I had the privilege of getting this extra layer of education, and it was so valuable to me. I can't explain how valuable it was. And then, but the best part was getting out into the countryside and working as an intern for 5 months in 1982, which, they thought I was a great winemaker. It was only a great vintage.
Yeah.
I never told anybody.
No, yeah, but you know what? Whatever. All the stars align when they align, right? That's okay.
I don't know.
It's interesting you said that it's free because don't the French, I know in high school, I think it's still today. What's high school in French? Lycée? Yeah. You sort of have to choose a path.
Yes.
That's probably why some of the schools are different, at least the cost of them, because you got to choose a path. You're going to be a chef. You're going to be
you can veer towards a trade or a profession or.
So how important do you think for any young winemaker, including your son, Josh, is it to experience harvests and winemaking outside of the U.S.?
I think you certainly can't say it's required, but based on my experience, based on the experience of many people I've known, it just adds a depth. You can be as smart as a whip, and anybody from any profession who has the passion and the smarts can make wine. But if you want to have and that's what they have in the old country in Europe is a depth of not just understanding, but, embedded, it's natural. It's not a put on. It's not an affectation. It's a natural thing. And you pass it on to your kids, And I'm so delighted that my son is
it's great.
Is following after me.
I mean, I have an anecdotal comment to make about your son.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah. I mean, here we are drinking this at
Vivum 2017 right now.
Gorgeous Cabernet. You're making wine for the Coppola family. You've made wine at Dominus. You've made wine at Camus. Swanson. These amazing places. And you've made wine in Bordeaux. And then I go to Charter with your son last time up, and we drink, frozen rosé.
Yeah.
I'm just
Well,
just wondering how Dad responds to something like, he's like, son,
he's because I work with him. On a technical side for a lot of his projects.
Yes.
Or all of his projects, and the idea of doing a canned rosé spritz or a frosé, as you say, was foreign.
Yes, I'm sure.
But I've got enough breadth of experience, and you never have the whole picture.
Of course not.
But what is wrong? What's wrong with that? Because again, if it gives people pleasure, and for me, it's fun because it involves flavors and part of wine is chemistry and figuring things out. So,
well, that's an important comment because, and I've wrestled with this a lot lately because I see like things like Cali Red from Snoop Dogg on the shelf, and they're flying off the shelf of that 19 Criminals, which is like almost sugar punch, and I cringe at it. But then at the same time, like you said, despite the fact that it's $9.99 or $10.99, which is my specialty, it gives people pleasure. And I shouldn't. Originally, I was sort of offended by it to the extent that that's not what wine is. But look, Bob Trinchero found White Zinfandel accidentally in 1974, and it brought people to the table that didn't drink wine prior.
It's a highly personal thing, what you like. And it's really easy to, sort of dismiss people who like less expensive, sweeter. Yeah, and a lot, if you're down in that category, $10, everything is sweet.
Right. It is.
It's really stuff. It's really unusual to find something that's not.
No. What is that? 4 or 5% sugar, you think?
Well, I know some expensive Napa Valley Cabernets that are 7%.
Really?
I hate to tell you.
No, yeah.
If a wine seems too smooth to be true,
yes,
it is.
It's been sugared. And this is grape sugar they add.
No, you can't. That's against the law in California.
So it's just arrested fermentation of some sort?
No, it's usually adding concentrate. Grape concentrate.
Grape concentrate, which is high in sugar.
Which is, 68% sugar.
So you have a thing like, you just triggered a thought. You have a wine like Mouton Cadet, which is, I think, even 25 years ago was making 1 million cases a year or something like that. Oh, and I had a bottle the other day. It was pretty satisfactory. It wasn't great, but it was satisfactory.
Yeah.
And I didn't sense any sugar in that wine.
No, I'd be surprised.
Yeah. Because it's
Americans like sugar.
Yeah.
And you look around at some of, I'm not going to name names, but some of the super successful Napa Valley people make wines that are sweet. That's something to think about.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, and I've tasted them, and I sell a lot of them. And that's just, and I'm happy to do it.
It's a personal thing. If something gives someone pleasure, you don't have to drink it, but.
Well, I think it brings people to the table, and I think that's important because you and I are still going to continue to learn. I'm more in the business side of things, and certainly have tasted lots of wines, but I continue to learn. I find new stuff. We're going to talk about the point system here in a second, but I want to talk about the DNA of wine in the sense of, growing up around it as you have. I didn't really grow up around it, but was indoctrinated to it fairly early, working in my dad's shop in the 70s. The Americans, it's part of the culture of most of Europe. Mm-hmm. It's just normal.
Yeah.
And as you said earlier, we're only, if Inglenook was founded in 1870 something or 1880 something, that's like young compared to wineries in Europe, the 12th century monks. And I had this question of Justin at Toomey today, like, how did the monks know, which plots of Burgundy were the special plots? How did they figure this out?
Trial and error too.
I suppose they just made wine and they tasted it. But the point is, Americans are coming to the table late when it comes to wine.
Mm-hmm. And people I know people who like kind of think they know it all.
Yeah, right. We can't.
I don't think you can never say that. You never stop looking for ways to get better.
Never.
You never stop looking for ways to give people more pleasure through wine.
So I was fascinated the other day. Somebody brought in a wine, and I've brought this up many times, but one of the things I put in my newsletter now is the most interesting wine I tasted that month. I average around 300 wines a month that I taste. And there's always something that's kind of unusual, kind of interesting, a new grape. And it was a Listan Negro from the Canary Islands. And I was like fascinated by this wine. And I forgot the rating, 95 or something. And I started to put it in my computer. And if the grape doesn't pop up, like you've already tasted this grape, I'm like fascinated because it doesn't happen very often. least Ontario, from the Canary Islands. I'm like, this is so good. And I bought some from my own cellar. And I was thinking, okay, this has got a 95, whatever the rating was. And there's an equivalent point of a wine in Napa or Sonoma or anywhere else in California, 95, but completely different price.
Yeah.
So how does the consumer sort through this idea?
I encourage people when they're interested in hearing what I think, that you use the points, use what a critic says, whether it's in the form of points, or stars, or just comments, to get you to try things, but don't like live by them. I think you live by them, you die by them. That's certainly true for producers. I mean, if all we did was chase scores,
Well, that's the thing.
But you, I'm sure you would admit that you've had high scoring wines you didn't like.
Oh yeah, many times.
So
like, how did this happen?
And sometimes in Napa, that means, a super extracted tannic wine that's as hard as this concrete right here.
Yeah.
That got 100 points was because you and I both agree, man, you take a sip, that is impressive. But could we share a bottle over dinner?
No, right.
Maybe not.
Because it's so dramatic that you can't really, it's not pleasant.
So for me, it's, if somebody with a fancy score or a comment or celebrity, you mentioned celebrities,
yes,
can get you to try something, well, even if that's not your cup of tea, it might be, or it might steer you off. Maybe you discover a new grape variety and then voila, there are other wines made from the same grape. So it's, and maybe they're half the price, or, it's just, there's a whole world. And I'm guilty of not pushing my boundaries enough. I drink certain things, and I'm drinking mostly Napa, and Bordeaux, but there's an ocean of wine out there.
When you go out, do you only go out with wine people? I mean, generally?
No.
Your friends?
Mostly my wife.
So they come out, here's my dilemma, and I think anybody in the wine business goes through this, is that you go out to dinner and they hand you the wine list. And you're like, this is a no-win. If there's more than 6 people at the table, this is a no-win because somebody is not going to think your choice is so great. When you, as the wine person, looks at the menu, and like the other day, I was up here June 4th, and my wife was in Scottsdale, and she texted me a list of wines at the restaurant because she's with 20 of her friends, and they know that Paul's the wine guy in their group, and so send Paul the list, see what they want. You know what I told her? I said, it didn't matter. I said, that whole list was Southern wines and spirits. Even though the wines are different, they're all the same ilk. I said, pick one, you're going to like it. There's a different price range, whatever. There was nothing interesting.
Nothing stuck out.
That you and I would be interested in tasting if we hadn't tasted it before. And I think that's okay. I'm okay with it for the consumer to find a brand, to hopefully latch on to the idea of drinking wine. But have you ever gotten in a situation where you choose a wine and somebody looks at you? They go,
I don't know. I don't get too wound up about it. But what I do at restaurants is I'll lean on Psalms, and when I can tell someone knows what they're doing, I'll help them guide me to something that they think that I haven't had.
Yes, that you haven't had.
Why order something you?
Exactly. I agree with
some
that.
situations you got to order something because
I agree
whatever.
with that.
But use that as like Italian. I know like 3 things about Italian wine, not much. And so I'm so delighted to go to a restaurant where there's a good Italian wine list, and say, hey, here's what we're going to eat. We're not going to spend a fortune, but we don't want to go cheap. Help me here, and you know what? 9 times out of 10, they do a good job.
They do a good job. If somebody hands you a list of Bordeaux at a restaurant, like I don't know, I think at the press where I saw you last, there are no Bordeaux on the list.
Press is Napa.
It's all Napa, right? But let's say you get a list, and I wanted to say this to the listeners to understand the idea of appellations, vintages, and then makers to have an educated guess at what you might be getting. And so, for instance, I went to a restaurant, a Michael Mina restaurant in LA, and she brought me the wine list. And I'm looking at it, it's the regular stuff. But then the Latour Carnet's second label, I forgot the name of it, but the 5th growth or the 4th growth is a 2008 or 9. And I brought the Somme over, just like you're talking about. And I said, have you had this? She said, yes. I go, is this not the second label of Latour Carnet? She said, yes. I said, bring that. It was only $80, which I was fascinated by. And it was gorgeous.
Yeah.
And so the idea that if you've tasted enough wine, you've read enough about wine, that you get a list and you can make an educated guess on your own what it might be.
Yeah.
So with you in Bordeaux, is that like having worked there? Can you look at that list and say, you know?
Yeah, unfortunately around here, we don't have much Bordeaux on this.
I guess that's a good point.
But that has happened.
Yeah.
That has happened.
Yeah.
I'd like it to happen more often.
Well, it's going to be hard to get Bordeaux into Napa.
In Napa,
Valley.
it's pretty.
And Burgundy.
There's a few Burgundies here and there, but not a lot of Bordeaux.
Yeah. So you spent this time at the Chateau de Lorey in the 82 harvest. So when did you come back to America?
Well, I was sharing a bottle of, I think it was Dom Perignon with Christian Moix and his.
The usual layout.
At his estate at the end of my internship. And I thought maybe he invited all the internships to share a glass.
Yeah.
But he asked me to be his first winemaker at Dominus.
Really?
Which I didn't know about.
In France, you were in France.
I was still in Bordeaux. I was going to come home. It was December. Going to come home for Christmas. And
that's fantastic. How long had you been there that he decided?
15 months, something. And but I was coming home anyway because I said, yeah, I'm gonna get married. I want you to try this other vintage of Advifum too.
Okay, we'll do that too.
It's okay. The 17 is drinking very nicely, but there's 16 open too. So
yeah, the nose is.
And this is my 100% Cabernet Sauvignon vineyard designated wine from Yountville, Sleeping Lady Vineyard.
Yountville.
Yountville. Wow. I helped name it.
You don't see too much appellated.
Well, Dominus is in Yountville, right? It's a stone's throw from where I worked at Dominus. Wow. Not a coincidence.
Gorgeous nose on the 17.
But it's the most southern vineyard in the Yountville appellation.
Wow. Interesting.
So it's nice and cool down there.
Right near the pickleball courts that we walked by yesterday. I don't know. I'm kidding.
I don't know about on the other side of the highway.
So when Dominus, Christian Moix comes to you and says, "Yeah, hey, I want you to run this."
So
thing.
I said, no, I'm not a winemaker. I said, I've done a couple internships and and that besides, that's not enough money to live on in Napa Valley, and
wow.
And he said, I said, oh, well, okay.
Were you negotiating at this moment? Or you?
Well, I was. And he said, well, okay, how about you start in 1984? We're only making an experimental amount in 1983. I'll make you a better offer because we're going to make a lot more wine. And you get whatever experience you want in the meantime. Whatever you think is going to add value to you starting as my first wine.
This is 82 or 83?
This is December 1982 is when we're talking.
Yeah. And
we're talking about a deal that's going to be consummated in mid-1984. And he said, you get whatever experience you need for the next year. And I will, if you keep your end of the bargain, come to work for me, I will bring you and your wife to live at Chateau Petrus after you get the 84 Dominus in barrels. So we shook on it, and that's what happened.
So that assumed you had a wedding date already scheduled.
No, but it was a vaguely summer.
Close,
so we got married in the summer of 84. Yeah. So
wow. Okay, so you went to Petrus as just.
So he brought me back there. I was I had the title of enologist, but I was the winemaker for Dominus as of 1984. And then but you train for life, and so a big part of my boots on the ground training for Moix was that 5 months at Petrus, living there.
Phenomenal.
Yeah. I gave tours.
Well, but I would have loved to have him as a tour guide.
I racked the wine.
Yeah. No, but even that part of the experience of wine, and I was had this conversation with many winemakers, that the terroir of this wine it includes what you went through. It adds up in minutia, but a lot of minutia makes something happen.
It's such an all-encompassing term that in the end it means almost nothing.
Yes.
But it's such a catch-all term, but you're exactly right that, the discussion we're having now, I'd have a hard time remembering every point we covered in our conversation, but not that it wasn't interesting, but at some level, it stays in my subconscious.
That's
and it will affect how I make winemaking decisions.
I think so.
In the coming years.
I think so.
And I think if you can remain open to all input.
Yes.
And not just have blinders on, I know the best way, I'm a scientist, I'm an artist, whatever you think you are. If you can remain completely open, you'll make better wine and you can mentor other people.
Well, isn't that the difference between a regular chef or a line cook and a chef that's willing to take risks, has gone through the experiences? Like my daughter is a boulanger in New York. She just had a baby, so she's not working. But she said, "Look, Dad, I'm going to Europe, and I'm going to learn how to bake in Europe, and I'm going to work in Europe, and then I'm going to come to LA, and I'm going to work in LA." And then she ends up in New York. All those steps of what she did as a boulanger puts her in a position at least to draw on that experience that otherwise you couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very important part of winemaking, and that passion behind that.
Mm-hmm.
Like this, I don't know how many winemakers in California, 4,000, 5,000 winemakers, maybe something like that.
Could be.
Some aren't so good.
Yeah. And it's not directly a function of your education either.
No, it's not.
Well, education takes different forms. It's not just academic.
Right.
But I think women make some of the best winemakers because they trust their intuition more.
And their palates.
And I'm not.
They say their palates are better than ours anyway. So.
Well, yeah, but that may not. But tasting, you have to trust your intuition too. It's like women, we like to see the numbers, the spreadsheet, and women, in my experience, are good at tasting and making wine decisions because they trust their gut.
Do they need a movement? Do they need the women in wine movement? I mean, I've had a lot of conversation. Natalie Bath was.
I think there is one.
There is one now, but did they need it to get the recognition amongst the good old boys?
Maybe. Because it was a pretty spotty.
Well, it was short,
for a long time.
The woman, there's a woman named Joanne Dupuis. She still lives here. She's 94 now, probably. Had an incredible conversation with her about 6 months ago. She was responsible for taking Stephen Spurrier around to Stag's Leap and to Chateau Petrus to find the wine. So she was a tour guide, and I won't tell you the whole story, but it was really fascinating. She found herself divorced without a vocation in the 60s, decided to put on tours. So she tells me she was the first female to address the Napa Valley Vintners Association. She's telling this story, and she gets up and starts talking about tourism and bringing tours to Napa, as well as she was taking tours to Bordeaux. And after the speech, Brother Timothy came up to her. And I go, wait. I go, Brother Timothy, like the Christian brother? Yeah, Brother Timothy. Yeah. I'm like, she goes, he told me that we need you here. Forget Bordeaux. We need you to bring tours to Napa. And that was, to me, not only was this idea of tourism in Napa just beginning, but a woman creating this mystique around it. Yeah. And I thought, wow, that probably was a long time coming as well. Yeah. And I had an incredible conversation with Natalie Bath at Rudd a few weeks ago.
Yeah, she's great.
And I think it just seems fascinating to me that in a vocation like this, that there had to be a separate effort. And I understand that there is and there should be.
However that evolved, it's certainly merited. And to be honest, it's still not perfectly equitable.
No.
But women have made huge progress.
But does that go back to the academic side of things, including getting into the schools and learning?
Yep. But the pioneers, the Heidi Barretts.
Yes.
Right. Who's been in my tasting group since the mid '80s.
Really? Yeah.
We graduated together from Davis.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. And Pam Starr and Kathy Corson, and there's a lot of women now who were really in their own way pioneers.
Bo Barrett and I. He went to the same high school. He was in my sister's class. I was in his brother's class. And I tell people, I've already said this 1,000 times, so the listeners are tired of hearing it, but I used to surf with the brother, Kevin. Well, actually, he used to throw rocks at me.
Oh,
so,
yeah. Uh-huh.
And Bo will tell you, that's why I got out of that place, because, there's just too much localism. And I didn't like it. So anyway, he's up here, and this is a fascinating part of history. Jim was a very close friend of my father's in the tasting world of wine. Mm-hmm. My dad carried we sold the 72 Chardonnay in the shop. So we go back a long way. As well as the Wetzel family at Alexander Valley Vineyards. My dad was invited to a party of theirs in 1972 or something at their house. So as the wine merchant, the Armenians are always the merchants, right? we don't understand we were talking about that earlier. We don't understand corporate America. We're the wine merchant person. So you went, what's interesting in your resume here is Swanson, which I bought a lot of in the old days. But Caymus, which is big, voluptuous wine. What'd you do over there?
Well, my first, actually cold called Caymus and said, "Do you guys need some help on anything? Because I kind of want to make a move here." And so they said, "No, but call us back in a few weeks." So I talked to Chuck Wagner in a few weeks later, and he said, "Well, it's 1995. We're gonna start." Actually, 1996. And he said, we're going to start a new winery in Paso Robles, and how would you like to develop that for us? So I got to design a winery.
That the Hope family one?
Well, it's called Triana.
Oh, Triana, yeah. That's one of the brands.
And so I got to kind of mentor a little bit Austin Hope down there. And,
yes.
He was a great kid at the
I had a
time.
great conversation with him.
I'd like to spend some more time with him now that he's kind of grown up. But so that was part of my first deal. And then, there were a few vintages, 2 or 3 vintages of Caymus Cabernets that weren't blended. And Chuck said, "Hey, you want to make some blends for us?" So next thing you know, I was blending cabs, and that was a huge experience. And then starting in 1999, I became the red winemaker there.
Does the style of Austin Hope have a lot to do with its roots in the Wagner family?
Probably.
Because it's a pretty voluptuous wine.
Probably. I think Chuck's been a great mentor to me.
Yeah. No, fantastic success story of the Napa Valley, as well as, maintaining the Napa culture. No one can say a bad thing about the Wagner family in the wine business.
And Chuck is like Christian Wex insofar as completely different people. They are visionaries. They know what people want, and they're smart. And if you have that
put that together,
if you have that combination, and you cannot, inarguably, both of those men have created huge just empires here.
It's the interesting thing. And I wrestle with this all the time. We discuss it a little bit, but the branding of wine, for one, is it's worse than, salad dressing and toothpaste, because it's such an emotional product that people want to choose. They want to feel like, and I can't tell you, not growing up, in the last 10 years, even with my best friends, with all the experience that we have, there's still this emotional attachment to choosing your own thing, to having intelligence about your own brand, the wines you like, why you buy the wines that you buy. It's different than, it's not a widget. You don't get on Amazon and say, what's the cheapest way to buy the same widget? Otherwise you'd be buying $3.99 floor stacks.
Yeah, and plus there's a million choices.
And there's a million choices. And now we're, like try and get, for instance, the TTB to find a label that hasn't been used, that's got Oak, Ridge, Napa, Sonoma, or any other, appellated name in it, because that's why you see all these crazy names, Fat Cat.
Plus, when my son Josh named the first wine that he made, Taken, it's because all the good names were taken.
Oh, okay, that's hilarious.
Which led to Available, which led to Complicated.
Oh, that's funny.
So he had a lot of fun with that.
Space Age and
now on his own he's developed other brands, but
Taken. I remember the brand.
Yeah.
I remember that brand.
Yeah, it used to be his deal, yeah.
So how does a brand like Ad Vivum get traction?
Well, it's word of mouth.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that your mouth has developed to help spread the word, because literally, we don't, I'm the only employee. Yeah. Josh helps me and my daughter helps me a little bit with sales, marketing and stuff, but I'm the accountant, the bottle washer, the winemaker. So
do people understand that about the wine business, how hard that is?
No. And I was a longtime family or small family owned winemaker, right? And you'd think I would know everything. I would understand the business perfectly, but I still got into it myself, and I resisted for a long time.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize, even after decades of making wine for other people, how much work it is.
Yeah.
It's because there's this economy of scale. I have to have the same bonding, the same compliance things taken care of.
Is this kind of like what they didn't teach in Harvard Business School? Like you went to enology school and you come out and you're bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. But
in Bordeaux, they do a better job of teaching you things about, compliance and that sort of thing. And at Davis, you should have to take a business class. You should have to, take, there should be wine business classes you have to take.
But there isn't.
Not to my knowledge.
Well, because look, wine is business, and I think people don't understand too, in general, the margins in wine suck. When it's all said and done, the margins suck. And if you're on my side of the fence with the direct-to-consumer sales and websites and all this stuff, let's try the 16.
Here's the 16.
This is excited to taste this.
It's a little cooler year, but I think
that's fine.
You'll enjoy the texture of this wine.
It's so complicated. I can just tell you, in the last 5 years, 2 years even, I'll just highlight one metric that is important and why I think podcasting and media is so important in the wine business now. I would have, if I could have, 10 years ago, if I sent an email to all my email customers, hey, I got this, I find, you would be shocked at the stuff I find, but we find this stuff, we find this amazing Sonoma wine. I get it to your door for $5.99 or $6.99 on a special, but I got to sell all of it. I would probably sell 10,000 bottles, like in 72 hours, because everybody opened every email then, and there were no filters.
Right.
Gmail didn't exist.
Right.
And none of the stuff that that the headwinds to marketing existed. Now, if I found that exact same deal at the same price.
Is that like 90s?
Yeah, it'd be like the 90s when email was like different. Now, if I do that same exact thing, I would sell hundreds, maybe hundreds, because it's filtered, it goes to spam, it goes to promotional bot, whatever the tabs are. And
plus they're getting hit by lots of people now.
Right.
So you got competition.
Right. Their inbox is full.
Yeah.
So what do? You go to Facebook, or you go to
It's the same
Instagram.
for us.
Yeah.
As producers.
So that's why the question was how Vivum gets out there. I mean, you work for one of the prolific guys, Francis Ford Coppola, and the brand. I mean, I bought his claret.
Now you're off on a different brand now.
Right.
Inglenook is a lot different from Francis Ford Coppola.
Right.
Same, so Francis Coppola and his family, they merged Francis Ford Coppola Winery with Delicato. So it's complete. It's out. He's on the board of Delicato, but it's out of their hands now.
Oh, the Francis Ford Coppola brand is what went to Delicato.
Yes, not Inglenook.
Which is a big, big brand.
Yeah, it's like, Inglenook, we make 25, 30,000 cases. They made 1.5 million, 2 million cases over there in Geyserville.
Wow.
They're out of that business. Francis and Eleanor Coppola's love is of Inglenook.
And Inglenook now. Okay.
1,700 acre.
But when did that, when in 89, let's say, it was all his, right?
Yeah, I forget when it started.
Probably something like that.
Seems like it was later than that. But.
So when did he buy the Inglenook, the classic Inglenook?
Well, in 1975, he bought the most valuable land. He bought about 1,500 acres, but not the chateau or the winemaking facility or the name. But he was smart. He bought 1,500 acres. Fast forward, so that's 1975. 1995, he was able to buy the chateau and the front property. Wow. Now he's got almost 1,700 acres.
Wow.
It wasn't until 2011 he bought the name Inglenook back and all of the inventory in the world.
Wow.
So he could destroy it or whatever he did with it. Because he decided the Inglenook name he was reunifying the entire idea of Inglenook.
Yeah, which is great.
36 years, millions of dollars. I can't say that I have that kind of vision, and persistence.
No, that's hard.
But he,
and risk.
To his credit.
Yeah.
And so it's a phenomenal, you should come there sometime.
I would love to. I bought the claret in 89. I bought some Inglenook. Oh man, it was a Charbonneau, like a 79
yeah,
Charbonneau.
But see, that was during the time that the brand was owned by a corporation.
Oh, so it came from a corporate.
Yeah. After
he bought it out of what?
After the late 60s until 2011. You got like a 40-year period there.
So what was his fascination with wine at that time? Just, successful director?
He grew up, his family was Italian.
Yeah.
So he grew up, he could tell you, like, he had wine from the time he was a little kid.
Yeah.
And, but not the great wines of the world. I mean, kind of like a little bit like my family. But, as of course, with his success, he had the chance, I'm sure, to try great wines. But it was in 1975 and, talking to Bob Mondavi, he realized he was sitting on a gem there. So he started making Rubicon.
Wow.
In 1978.
Rubicon, 1978.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I have to tell you a funny story. I had this podcast yesterday with Haig Mardikian, the father of George Mardikian, on a famous restaurant in San Francisco called Omar Khayyam's. And he had bought 270 acres in 1945 or 46 or somewhere in that range, late 40s, of Napa Valley land and planted vegetables for his restaurants. He had 2 restaurants, one in Fresno and one in San Francisco. That land now is Quintessa. And he never planted grapes on it. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, 270 acres today? With that brand, what the value was, and the son had sold, the family sold it. He goes, I don't want them to sell, but the family told me to sell it. I forgot when this was. Maybe it was the 60s or 70s. And they bought some property in Freestone and they make Pinot Noir from it. But I thought that was a fascinating story about the evolution of Napa. But let me ask you about, this is a gorgeous, the dark chocolate in this 16 is fascinating. You source grapes, contracts.
Long-term contract with, the Bettinelli family that owns Sleeping Lady Vineyard.
And you were producing it at Clos Pegase?
No, I make this wine at Alpha Omega.
Alpha Omega.
Mm-hmm. I'm the only client there.
So an AP, which is alternative proprietorship for the listeners, where you can hang your shingle if you own a winemaking license at various places, once the federal government decides it's okay for you to do that. So when you venture into this, knowing that the headwinds of getting a brand recognized and understanding the consumerism of wine, what does this sell for?
$175.
175.
Retail.
And the grapes, I was talking to Mike Salacci. He said, boy, in 2018, Cabernet in Napa was $8,000 a ton. And that kind of equates to
and that's the average price.
Yeah,
so
the average price.
Don't confuse that with the what most of us pay for super premium.
Yeah. Oh, great. Because okay. I don't need to know the numbers.
No, I'm not going to tell you.
You're not going to tell you, but I want to understand something in this industry.
Please.
Mike says it's 8,000 a ton. That's the average. Well, what's that quick calculation tells you that that's an $80 to $90 bottle of wine, just for regular margins, which, you and I know, when I think about sampling and distributors and
I have to pay for the privilege of making my wine at someone else's winery.
And you got to pay a commission, so to speak.
And that old economy of scale really can kick you.
Then how do we end up with $20 bottles of Napa Cab?
Well, those wines are, I would say, never made, crushed and fermented, aged as that wine.
Yes.
That was bulk wine from somebody.
Bulk wine, right.
It was the press wine from somebody. It was...
That's a broad market, bulk market.
Yeah, that's it. And that stuff gets sweetened up and oaked up.
Right, it gets changed.
And but that's a bulk wine.
Right.
Blending. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
I've done that for people.
Right.
I think the idea of blending is fascinating.
So where does that come from? Let me turn it around.
Well, hey, not everybody's sales are fantastic.
No, I understand. I get that. But somebody asked me once, hey, can I get the overproduction of Screaming Eagle? And I'm like, no. I don't know where to do that. Is there such a thing? Is there overproduction?
Probably. So here's something. During my entire career, I have had the privilege of working for people. I mean, I think at Domino's and Caymus, it was about the same. About 20%, you're going to make 100% of the wine. 20%, let's just say the Cabernet, is sold in bulk. Why? It's not because sales aren't good, because those houses have phenomenal sales.
Right.
It's because of quality standards. The same is true at Inglenook. The same is true of Van Viva. If I have a barrel that doesn't make it, I sell it in bulk and I eat it.
And you get minimum for the gallonage.
And when you're looking at the books and the cost of goods for those gallons are horrifically high.
Past what you're selling.
But if you have quality standards, you have, what else do you have?
Yeah.
You could, all that wine in bottle, the color might still be pretty good. Is it? And an owner might say, I don't know, is it, Chris, is it that much different? And they're the ones,
right?
The owners,
right?
But owners like Christian Moax, Chuck Wagner, Francis Coppola, they understand better than anyone how important quality, because that's your future.
Right.
Once you step back from the quality, and it's not just scores, we're talking about the inherent quality of the wine.
Forget the scores for a second, because we already had this discussion, but that's a really important aspect that we're coming up pretty soon on 45 minutes. How long, how many vintages would it take? And I've tasted numerous vintages of numerous wines along the years and stuff that never lasts, stuff that does whatever. If you're not keeping a close eye on that, and I'm assuming that the more you make, the harder it is to keep the closer eye on it.
It depends. People like Caymus they have software. They know where every bottle is. Super smart.
Super smart. But how many vintages before the consumer goes, I'm not buying that again? One?
They're not buying it again. Why?
You didn't keep a close enough eye on the last vintage, and they win the bottle.
It's hard to put.
And their friends are going,
I couldn't put metrics on that.
When we're talking about how emotional the product is.
But I think it might not even be conscious, right?
Yeah.
People get a point
for sure.
Someone who's spending, $150, $200 per bottle of wine, they're going to be discerning.
Of course.
And they might order, I have people they order from me every year. Well, if they're going to get that case of wine and they'll pay, $2,100 a case for a case of wine.
Yeah.
They have every right to be picky.
Oh, I agree with that.
And if they stop ordering, it's sort of unless they had a reversal in fortunes, I have reason to be worried about why they're not buying anymore.
For sure. And it's such an emotional product that I bought this from, I found this wine. It's Chris Phelps and it's Ad Vivum. And they serve it to their friends, and nobody goes, "Wow, that's a problem."
Well, it's all experiential. I mean,
but part of that, if that vintage wasn't what you expected to be, and you put it out there anyway without controlling it, and they don't get that wow from their friends, that's the emotional part of the product. I can't tell you how many times I get emails from customers, both negative and positive, about I served this at my family dinner and everybody flipped over it.
Mm-hmm.
That runs my company.
There's so many permutations on that it's
hard to figure it out.
No, to be honest, I try not to spend a lot of time sort of worrying about that.
Well, you can't worry about it.
But I think all I can do from my point of view as a winemaker, as a producer, selling my wine, is to make it the best I can.
That's it.
And you have to entrust when you buy my bottle of wine, you're entrusting me to have done the work necessary. I don't blend my press wine in, for example. So right there, that's like 10, 15% right off the top. That gets sold in bulk.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
So we make decisions all the way along, and the French barrels I buy, the whole shooting match is
it's all part of your brand and part of your quality.
And I think for the most part, when you meet the winemaker, the owner, they should be able to look you in the eye and really tell you honestly, here's my wine and I made it honestly and I want your feedback on the wine and
you can taste that.
And you can taste it.
You can taste it.
And you can, but in Napa, there's a lot of hype and smoke and mirrors, but I think you can see through that. But a lot of times you don't get to meet the owner or the winemaker.
No.
Right? But you do. You do.
I do, but it's about the story anyway. And there are a lot of great wines I taste that are very inexpensive that represent something. And this is probably the last topic we have time to talk about. But
I want to tell you why it's called Ad Vivum too.
Yeah, please do that.
But what, right now?
Yeah.
So I got hit by lightning in 2005. Survived. And so this
up here
in the Sierra Nevada mountains.
Wow.
Yeah. And I decided, or it was decided for me, that I was going to realize how important life is. So vivere is to live in Italian or Latin, and vinum is wine in Latin. So vivum is where wine and life meet. Okay.
Wow.
And then ad is a little helper word that means I'm going intentionally in that direction. So
wow, interesting.
So life is the most precious thing we could possibly have.
Right.
And if we use wine appropriately, it can enhance our lives.
Wow.
That's my whole.
That's a great, but being struck by lightning, and you don't mean that in the philosophical.
No. I mean that literally.
Enlightenment way. I gotta ask the question. I mean, like, how did that feel? What happened?
I was out for a while, so I
really,
yeah, I wouldn't say it really. I really felt anything, to be honest, other than weird and out of it for a while.
Crazy. Well, maybe that does lead to this last subject about wine and how it makes you feel, how it's different. I mean, we don't get excited about Maui Blanc pineapple wine. We don't get excited about fermented other fruits, but
some people may though.
I know, but you don't talk about terroir.
I'm with you.
When you ferment grapes, and it's maybe it's the history of it, maybe it's rooted in the fact that it's a representation of time and place. But there's something unique about grapes being fermented. And all we're doing here really is sort of refining that, figuring out ways to make it taste better or feel better or do it. But when it's all said and done, I think that it's a connection to the earth. Mm-hmm. It's through your feet into the ground. And that's why we can talk about it. That's why we can share it. That's why we can discuss it. That's why we can open a new bottle and have a new conversation every time it happens, which you don't get with a bottle of bourbon.
No.
At least. Well, some guys do, but I mean, in the sense of we swirl this around, and particularly with me, and I have a lot of non-wine friends, the conversation at dinner always comes back to a bottle of wine. It's a non-threatening conversation. It's not political. We don't get angry about philosophy, but the conversation and the knowledge that people want to seek is fascinating to me for this product. And I don't know what it is. I can't define it.
I think it is hard to articulate. Yeah. And sometimes you don't even need to use words.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes a wine just gives you pleasure and you're looking at your friend, you're drinking it with and you're smiling. At least we are smiling right now.
For sure.
I don't know if it's because we like each other or not, but
we're having a good conversation.
But I think wine brings people together and I've been grateful for that. And it is a rich medium to share because it has a story and it comes from a place. So
it makes you feel something. Chris, it's been a pleasure being here. I look forward to more conversation. We'll do it again.
Yeah, pleasure's mine.
I'm going to bring some into the shop.
Great.
I have this new shop. We just got a new liquor license, which is going to have high-end distilled spirits and high-end wines only. So we have all the regular stuff in there, poetry and whatever, Lafite, Margot. They're all there. I want to put some Ad Vivum in there next to the Space Age Rosé.
Really? I love that. I would be honored.
I appreciate that. Thanks for the time today.
Likewise.
Cheers.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Kalamkarian. Don't forget to subscribe because there's more great interviews on their way. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.